Hi, my name's Kevin Jordan, and I'm going to be talking to you about ocean motion. Basically, what occurs when tides, waves, and other contributing factors such as sea level rise affect the oceans, or excuse me, the coastal geography and geology of uh, the land on the earth. There are 70% of the world's surface is oceans. And if you think about it, the other 30% is land. So what happens on the oceans is particularly of interest in what happens on land because there's only 30% of it, and that's where the humans and most life or all life that we, as we know it, above water happens to be. So everything that happens to the oceans does affect the properties of land. So let's talk about three very important topics. Let's talk about tides. Let's talk about waves, and let's talk about erosion. And finally, as a postmark and a postscript, we'll talk about sea level change. First of all, tides. Tides are either neap or spring. And let me explain those two topics for you. Tides are very important to the geology and geography of oceans. The tides are controlled by the moon and gravity, and the sun and gravity. When a neap tide is the low tide, that's when the sun and moon are perpendicular to each other. So basically, like this. This is the sun, this is the moon, and the earth is the middle. And the sun is pulling one way, the moon, who's closer to us, is pulling another. And so the tide is not as high as it should be. That's when we see the moon in a first or third quarter, basically a half moon. When the sun and the moon are parallel to, or excuse me, parallel to each other, and the earth is right here, we have a spring tide, which is a very high tide. These tides come into play when we're dealing with coastlines. And if you consider that 40% of the world's land is, or excuse me, the cities are on land that's in a coastline, tides become a very important part of the ocean and the motion in the ocean. Waves are another huge contributing factor, and those are contributed, those waves that we're familiar with, the ones that come curl and crest and all those things, start thousands of miles offshore and are pushed by usually wind, and wind over time just continues the energy. Now the energy can neither be stopped nor changed. It can only be, it can alter other things. So once we see waves cresting, that means that the continental shelf is closer, and there's a lot of geology in that. But basically, waves are a contributing factor, and the higher the tide, the higher the higher the waves, or the higher to the coast, the higher the coastal plane is, the more destruction that can be had. If there's a lot more wind and lot more circulation of energy going on in the Pacific Ocean way out past Hawaii, then those winds and those waves continue to go into the coast of California. So all those waves, one wave could start way out in Japan and continue going all the way to California. That's particularly interesting. Now, the other thing is the moving water. We have so many different landforms that have been caused by erosion and coastal erosion. There are so many different types of things: spits, land spits, trombolos, headlands, land bridges. Haystack Rock, for example, where The Goonies was filmed in the 1980s, is an island to itself, but it's part of the mainland. It was part of the mainland at one time, and because of the waves and tides and erosion, all of that, there's been a separation between the land and the rock itself. It's an interesting fact to look up. Also, The biggest thing that we have to worry about these days, and especially moving forward, is coastal degradation, and that's caused mainly by sea level rise. Now, I'm not going to be a proponent or just a detractor for global warming. All I'm going to say is that our sea levels have risen since recorded records, and that's continuously happening. The more that the sea level rises on both coasts, let's just talk about North America in particular, there are definite distinctions between erosion patterns. We're getting things on the West Coast that haven't happened ever in our lifetimes or since recorded history, and we're having things happen on the East Coast, such as Hurricane Sandy, which destroyed hundreds of millions of dollars worth of property because of beach erosion brought upon by the sea level rise. This is happening at an alarming rate, and it's together with the tides, the waves, currents, all the different motion in the ocean is contributing to coastal insecurity. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was 5 miles away from the beach where I grew up. And I can remember going down to the beach at low tide and picking up shells and waiting till the tide came in and then going home. But when I know that the marshes have been overflown, the 5 miles that I lived away from the beach, it's now 2.5 miles. So that's habitat loss. That's some serious examples and some very dynamic examples of sea level rise and different things coming into play. There's also a lot of other contributing factors that humanity has to play. But for millions of years, these geological and these evolutionary forces, the oceans have changed and shaped and shifted over millions of years the way that our current global geology is. But the more we can contribute to trying to maintain our sea levels or try to stop the sea level rise or try to abate things that are going on, it would be a very productive thing. But with all the tides, the neap, the spring, there's a lot of unknowns that are coming out, and there's more to be discovered. And that's where knowing what ocean motion and loving and understanding what our planet's about are really important. My name's Kevin Jordan. Thank you for letting me share.